White people are not responsible for the U.S.-American slave trade. I'm white. My family immigrated here 50 years ago. Roughly 35% can trace lineage to the colonies, so the other 90% of people likely had nothing to do with the slavery shit, and potentially were enslaved in other parts of the world while the African slave trade was going on in America. Greece was enslaved by the Turks from 1500 to 1800, so do I get reparations too? Obviously not. Cut that stupid shit out. Edit. To the history majors saying the Greeks weren't as enslaved as the Africans. Okay, great. The points are, reparations are wrong, and don't judge people by the color of their skin. Also, if we judge others for their ancestors' deeds, let's just all put ourselves in jail then, cause we all have some ancestor that killed, raped, etc. Some Jews that worked at factories like BMW got reparations. It's ridiculous. It's pretty much like saying, alright, your grandfather murdered someone somewhere on the world, now you need to pay for it because he didn't got convicted. My wife gets called a slave master and all sorts of shit when she has to discipline or hold accountable any black employees where she works. She's been called a cracker and Confederate piece of shit and all sorts of wild names when she's had to fire black employees. Her family is German and they immigrated to the U.S., Pennsylvania, in the 1920s, and her father moved to the South in the late 70s. Her family wasn't here during slavery and wasn't even in the South prior to the civil rights movement, but so long as you're white in America, your family owned slaves and you're a racist. Slavery has been part of the human condition for a couple 100,000 years. We are all the descendants of slaves, and the descendants of slave owners. Every culture on every continent held slaves. We have been doing this since the beginning. Then this odd thing happened, a paradigm shift occurred and we got this idea that nobody should be slaves. We even fought a bloody civil war over it, and in 1863 we Americans ended slavery in our part of the world. Actually, the process started in 1775 but the full proclamation was in 1863. The process had been going on all over the world with many countries stopping and starting again, or stopping but then just doing it quietly in other countries. What King Leopold of Belgium did in the late 19th century in the Congo was fucking horrible. The point is, we as humans have a bloody and horrible relationship with slavery that we all, regardless of race, have been impacted and influenced by. The fact we as Americans threw off the yokes of slavery is amazing because given the entirety of human history, the last 250 years is just a speed bump, an insignificant high point that could easily be set back 1,000 years with a big war or two. This idea that one race of people is responsible for slavery is just ignorance of history and perspective. We are really just one race with a variety of colors, and we have been doing rotten shit to each other for a long time. So my family fought to end slavery. Do I still owe reparations? Everyone deserves an equal chance to getting an education and good job opportunities. No one is really talking about the slave trade right now. Most conversations are focused on how black people were segregated, redlining, Jim Crow laws, etc. These laws not only were way more recent, but are still affecting black populations today. Edit. As well as prisons using what is essentially slave labor. Shush, you. You're guilty of, rolls the dice. Benefiting from systemic heteronormative European infrastructural subliminal bias. Or something. Are we white Europeans able to get reparations from the Arab slave trade? Did you know that only about 1% of Americans were slave owners? Also, race doesn't determine character. Edit. So I leave for a while and everyone has a cow. Look, the math is simple. In 1860, the total free population of the United States and its territories was 27,489,561. A total of 393,975 people owned 3,953,760 slaves. That's 1.4% of the population that owned slaves, with an average of 10 slaves per owner. https://www.quora.com/what percentage of people in America owned slaves at the peak of slavery? Now one can throw some antics at it and change it to households or cherry-pick states or find some other ways to spin the information, but the numbers, official from the census, and math are correct. I agree. I'm Indian. Should UK pay money to India for colonization? No. Because UK citizens today didn't colonize India. Germany literally paid reparations though. A lot of people also either forget or don't know that African kings sold their people to white Europeans for wealth and technology, though it didn't matter in the end really. I don't think the point is to fault people. The point isn't to say white people are the problem. The point is to recognize that there is a problem of systemic racism that has unfairly relegated the black population. Hundreds of years of slavery followed by decades of disenfranchisement and segregation don't just go away. This has left black communities far behind. These are issues that were there, and are still present today. So regardless of whose fault it was, what is important is to recognize there is a problem and that we need to address it. People who hate white people because of slavery are the equivalent of people who hate Germans because of the world wars. Yeah, Romans were enslaving whole known world back then. Stupid Italians raxed. Also, in Africa black people hunted other black people and traded them to other black/white/Arab people. But that doesn't serve the narrative, so just ignore it. Without giving a personal opinion on the matter, I want to correct some confusion about the motivation for reparations. Of course, anyone can give their own reason, so some people will say it is exclusively about slavery hundreds of years ago, but I think the stronger argument is that reparations is only indirectly related to that. Reparations is about addressing the government's role in creating institutions that directly harmed black people in our lifetime. Specifically, I will make the case regarding housing segregation. Okay, not so much a young person's lifetime, but certainly those of the boomers, and the effects didn't get Thanos snapped out of existence with the passing of the Fair Housing Act in 1968, which largely prevented further injustices of this type but did nothing to amend the prior injustices. Prior to this, the federal government heavily discriminated against black people by refusing to insure house mortgages to black people, black neighborhoods, and mixed-race housing developments. Since basically everyone gets a mortgage for their house, this prevented black people from buying houses in many places, which is a huge way that Americans were able to establish wealth. The story is so much longer than this one snippet of information, but I can't make a book out of this post. Instead, I'll just refer you to an article on the subject by NPR, https://www.npr.org/2017/05/03/526655831/A Forgotten History of How the U.S. Government Segregated America, as well as the book that extensively covers the topic, https://www.npr.org/book/title/526656129/The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. The point is that the U.S. government explicitly and directly harmed black people, black neighborhoods, and their ability to generate wealth, within the last century. Since housing affects people their whole life, the impact of this has been very slow to fade, and can still be easily observed today. Reparations isn't owed by white people today because they share a skin color with Slavers 300 years ago and something white guilt. The argument is that the US government owes reparations because of what it did within the last century. Now, you may say that's all well and good, but the people fund the government, so why are white people ultimately paying? You could even imagine a white immigrant who arrived here last year and certainly had no part in that. But here's the thing, you can use the same argument to say that our white newcomer has to pay for the US debts and obligations to China and elsewhere, and our newcomer also didn't agree to those deals. The government cannot simply break its international deals because some of its citizens don't like them or weren't around for their creation, and so it is the same with reparations. If you believe the US Gov should make amends for the wrongs it committed, within the last century in fact, then the duty falls on the current taxpayers, regardless of their individual culpability. You may disagree that the US Gov owes anyone anything, sure, that is another discussion, but if you find the gov indebted from their past actions, then the taxpayers of today are just as liable as with any other debt the US owes.